On this video, I'm going to give you a recap on my 2020 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. I'll go over its build transition through the years, what I used it for, and why I ultimately decided to sell it. Alright, now let's start with the basics. I picked up this gator colored Jeep in early 2020 from Big O Dodge in Greenville, South Carolina. I actually traded in my 2018 Chevy Colorado ZR2 on it, as I wasn't happy with that truck's overall performance and frequent visits to the dealership. One thing I was planning on doing with that Colorado was placing it on 35's. I had already ordered these right before I decided to throw in the towel and jump to the Gladiator. So the first thing that I did was put on a set of 35 by 1250 R17 Nitto Ridge Grapplers on the stock wheels. I used a Taser JL Mini from Z Automotive to recalibrate for the tires, and I really liked the fact that I could do the auto stop start delete with that module. After that, I picked up a bed mat from DZ and a bed cover from Best Top. The Best Top cover is the more expensive twill version, and it's genuinely one of the best soft roll covers I've ever owned. It was very easy to clean and sealed out dirt and water much better than other covers I've had in the past. While I could have left the stock wheels in 35's, I wanted to go with an aftermarket wheel for a few reasons. Number one, I wanted a black wheel, and I wanted something to relax that 1250 pattern, as it was crowning just a bit from that more narrow stock wheel. So I ended up getting these AEV Pentler wheels. They're in a 17 by 8.5, and they have 5.77 inches of back spacing. The poke is barely noticeable over the factory wheel, but I will say at 35 pounds, they were a little on the heavy side. Overall, I like the look, the features, and the build quality. That's why I got them. I never really noticed a fuel economy difference from the 35's and the AEVs, so I don't think it's that big of a performance hit. And yes, you can run 35's with no lift on the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. I'll put a link on the screen right now to a video going more in detail to that. I absolutely recommend it. I think the 35's just fill out the wheel well so much better. It's also worth noting that my Jeep had the 3.6 liter with the 8-speed automatic, a combo that I never had an issue with, and still to this date I think works fantastic. After changing out the wheels, the Jeep simply served as a daily driver and kid hauler for about a year. As many of you might know, a few months after purchasing the Gator Gladiator, I actually picked up another 2020 Rubicon JT in granite crystal metallic. My intention was to simply build that Jeep up and leave this one as close to stock as possible so I could have a decent daily driver for hauling around the kids. Of course, what ended up happening was I got the opportunity to test what at the time was an all-new tire from Nitto called the Recon Grappler AT. From a content standpoint, which is primarily what I do for a living, it was a great opportunity to get my hands on one of the first sets of the new Nitto tire. Now, the issue was they didn't launch this tire for a 17-inch wheel, only a 20. This meant I had to get another set of wheels, which are the Motive 428 ballast that you see on the screen. The other challenge is the only size that I could get my hands on was a 37 by 1350 R20. This also meant I had to figure out some sort of lift for the Jeep, as 37s and no lift I had already found out doesn't work. So what I ended up doing is adding a 1-inch front coil spacer and 1-inch front bump stop from TerraFlex, and in the rear I put in a set of Daystar 3/4 inch spacers. As you can see, I actually wheeled the setup like this, and it worked way better than I ever would have imagined. I'm not a big 20-inch wheel guy, but I didn't hate the look as much as I thought I was going to. The wheels were actually lighter than the AEVs, and despite it being a 37, the Recon Grapplers were only about 2 pounds heavier than the 35-inch Ridge Grapplers. This combo rolled smooth and worked well enough off-road that I decided to basically discard my old tires and wheels and put them under my 2021 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392 and just stay with the 20s and 37s. Of course, I don't leave vehicle stock for long, so when I ended up moving up to 37's on my 392, I decided to put those tires on the original 392 Extreme Recon wheels. I was originally planning on selling this set as a combo, but I ended up tossing them on my Gladiator because I had a trip planned where I knew there was going to be a lot of mud and the wheel might get messed up, and I didn't want to have a 20 with a bunch of rock rash on it. So I said, you know what, I'll put this setup on here and just, worry about what I'm going to end up doing with them later. After I put them on, I liked that look so much, I decided to keep it. And so roughly after 2 years of originally getting those tires, I was back on the same 35-inch ridge grapplers. Another big change I did around that same time was remove the Best Top tonneau cover and install this Best Top Super Top for Trucks 2. I wanted more storage for trips and adventures with the family, but I didn't want to commit to a hard shell cover since I used the truck bed for hauling so many different things. While this cover doesn't offer much in the way of security, it worked great for my needs and it sealed out dust okay and water very well. The sides rolled up, which was great for accessing gear and made for a really cool safari look on the beach. This setup stayed on the back of the Jeep up until the point I sold it. I really wish I could have kept it, but I'll get into more about why I didn't later. For those curious, this is the twill version and I would absolutely recommend it. My only two genuine complaints is that I wish you could opt for a completely solid cloth rear window, as the rear window is easy to scratch if you're going to be going off-road or hauling some bigger stuff in the back. And I think they need to figure out a better way to secure the sides, because occasionally mine would come loose, especially after a hard rain or a big storm. I'm doing a lot of highway driving. You could see it flap. Not a big deal to get them, back in the channel, but I think that could be improved. In terms of issues I've had with the Jeep over this 2-year time span that I've shown you up to now, it was basically zero. Well, that was until June of 2022 when the auxiliary battery died. I probably could have had it covered under warranty, but I knew this was also an issue with the JL platform, so I decided to delete both factory batteries in favor of one large battery. I'll put a link on the screen now to a video where I talk about this a little bit more, and there will be a link in the description of the video with the battery that I used from AutoZone. Since I never used the auto stop start feature, there was really no issue with deleting that second battery, and to anyone that's thinking about it, I highly recommend it. You can put a bigger battery in here and then you don't have to worry about that small battery pulling down the big battery, which is a common problem. Now let's fast forward to January of 2023. I ended up putting 38's on it with the 1-inch lift that I'd been running for the past 2 years. Now what you are seeing here is a 38 by 1350 R17 Nitto Trail Grappler mounted on a 17 by 8.5 bead grip wheel from Method. This wheel had 4 3/4 inches of back spacing, which is a fairly big change from the 5.2 inches I was running with the Extreme Recon wheels. It was necessary for such a large tire and definitely poked the tire out a good bit more than what I had with the 35's. Now to my surprise, this worked pretty decently on road, but it rubbed way too much off-road to be useful. Now based off of how well the tire cycled with just that little bit of lift I had, I felt like I could do a pretty small lift and make this combo work so the Jeep wouldn't be unpractically tall. I ended up ordering a 3-inch lift from BDS Suspension. I've tested a lot of different spring options under the Gladiator, and I feel like BDS uses some fairly light spring rates, which for this Jeep I really wanted. They ride really smooth, there's no weird coil bow, and it's not a 3-inch spring that's actually a 5-inch spring like others do on the market. It's pretty true to size for what it is, which is definitely what I wanted. Of course, I had to see if this setup would actually work, so I went wheeling and I found out it performed just fine, save for a little bit of rubbing behind the stock front bumper. Yes, the steering is pretty heavy, but overall fairly manageable, at least for the trails I was putting this Jeep on. I loved the low lift big tire look, but I will say the on-road performance wasn't that great. Mainly because I was still running the factory 410 gear set even after all this time and tire swapping. I just never saw the need to change differential gears. Luckily for me, I'd saved the Rubicon axles that I'd pulled out under my, what basically is now a 1-ton Gladiator, and they were re-geared with 488s. While a 513 would have been a better ratio for the 38s, I already had this axle set and it only took me a few hours to swap out the axle assemblies. Yes, I really need to get a lift inside of my shop, but hey, sometimes doing it on the floor is what you got to do. From this point, the only thing I needed to take care of was the rubbing issue from the tires on the backside of the front bumper. And to do this, I ended up ordering a front bumper from Evo Manufacturing and a winch from Come Up. You do have to chop off the bottom of the frame horns to install it, but that's fairly easy. Another thing that I did at the same time is I installed one of Evo's no limit sway bar disconnects. In case you don't know, the sway bar plug is one of the most common failure points on the Gladiator. When the plug itself comes loose or disconnected, the Gladiator will cut you out of your ability to use your lockers and in some case retract the front axle disconnect, leaving you without four-wheel drive. It is a terrible design in that regard and something easy enough to bypass using something like this Evo No Limit sway bar knob and a Taser JL Mini to tell the computer that you no longer have a smart bar. This more or less gets us caught up to now. My next move was to replace the aluminum knuckles with iron ones and swap in Dynatrac ball joints. But before I could even make that purchase, I ended up getting a phone call from my godbrother who happened to be looking for a Jeep to buy. Now, I wasn't planning on selling this Jeep and I really wasn't even sure what direction I was going to go with it. I was just kind of tinkering on it and just using it for fun. That being said, as much as I like having a lot of vehicles, I took it as a sign that I probably should cut this Jeep loose to him because I know where it will go. I know he'll take care of it. And if I ever want to use it for anything else or modify it, I know it's not that far away. So I figured, all right, I'll sell it to him. And that's what I did. Ironically, I told him, hey, this is what I was going to do next, and he ended up buying those parts, and so far as I know, they are actually getting installed, I believe, while I'm making this video now, so kudos to him on following through with that. While there's always more that you could do with any build, I was extremely happy with how reliable and usable this Jeep was over 4 years' time. I also absolutely love that gator color. I never intended this to be a build, quote unquote, and I don't really think of it as a heavily modified Gladiator by any means. Well, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you want to see stuff I'm working on behind the scenes, you can always check me out on all social media at Mansour Editor. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the trail.